So last time we talked about the stationary phase and the backing on the TLC plate, and I kind of drew this crappy little diagram here on your screen that shows you the backing of the plate with the stationary phase laid on top of it. The stationary phase, we said, is very important not to disturb. We do not want to crack it. We don't want to do anything to it to make it uneven. We don't want to flake it. We don't want to bend the back. We don't want to do anything to that stationary phase at all. And we said that we handle the plates on the sides for that reason. Now, I want to talk about the stationary phase. The stationary phase is pretty important because that's really what helps your separation out, right? So I want you to keep in mind that your stationary phase can be anything. All right, it doesn't really matter. If I can make a column out of various stationary phases, then I can make a TLC plate out of those same stationary phases as well. So there are hundreds of choices of stationary phase that's out there for you to pick from in the TLC world. However, almost every single time, we get two choices of stationary phase that are the most common. And that is the same as what we've been talking about in general chromatography itself. It's either going to be a silica TLC plate or an alumina TLC plate. It's one of the two here, right? So that issue is not going to go away yet. A lot of the times in TLC, I'm using a silica stationary phase that gets developed with my compound or component on it. It doesn't have to be that way every single time, all right? I've got hundreds to choose from, but it seems like everything that we do with TLC or when we use a TLC plate in a laboratory, commonly it is silica or alumina based, but it doesn't have to be. Please keep that in mind, all right? People make the assumption that everything has to be silica, and it does not. So silica and alumina, we talked about the structures of those previously in the last series of videos, and we said that silica and alumina is very polar. So these are very polar stationary phases that go onto the plate. So that means that polar molecules like dissolves like, right? So polar molecules will be attracted to that stationary phase. And it's going to stick to it a little bit more, and it's going to take its time to go up the plate because the mobile phase is going to have a harder time removing it and pushing it on up the plate. So, like dissolves like, this is a polar stationary phase. Therefore, polar molecules will stick to it a little bit worse than nonpolar molecules would. Okay? So that's kind of the general idea of the stationary phase that's out there. So silica or alumina. Now, silica and alumina are very similar. Silica and alumina are both polar. One's just aluminum based, one is silicon based. There is a slight difference though. In the last series, we said they're basically the same, right? And they are. They are similar in structure. They're similar in polarity. There's no big deal there. However, the silica and alumina, there is a reason that some people do use the alumina stationary phase. And it's better suited for non-polar solutes. Meaning that this is not as polar as silica. Okay, that's all that means. So, they're both polar. Don't misinterpret what I'm saying. They're both polar. However, alumina is not as polar as the silica. And because of that reason, the non-polar solutes tend to behave a little bit better with the alumina than it does with the silica. There's an easier separation process that can go on using alumina there instead. So, not a big deal. It's still not a big difference. You know, if it just have to do a preferred method, well, that's the one that I'm going to prefer. It's kind of like a milkshake, right? If I'm going to get a milkshake, I'm going to get a milkshake. I prefer a flavor, but, you know, I'll be okay if they change the flavor up on me and it's not exactly what I wanted and it's like chocolate coconut instead of just chocolate. I'd be like, okay, this might be a little bit better. I'm not going to argue with it. It's still a milkshake by all means, and it's still a stationary phase here as well, right? Okay, so that's the stationary phase choices that are the most common in the TLC world. Notice that the stationary phase has to be attached to the backing of the plate, and this means there has to be a binder. And that binder, we're not going to go into details with, but there's got to be some type of glue that kind of holds the stationary phase onto the glass or onto the plastic. And there's many different binders that are out there, or the glue that's out there to keep that together for you. And you can actually make these plates on your own if you have to be creative one day. It's not very hard, but we're not going to go into that process here. But do keep in mind there is a little bit of glue that holds that silica or alumina to the backing of the plate itself. Okay. Used to back in the day, you would have to make these plates, but now you just simply order the plates. It's actually cheaper and easier to order the plates already pre-made the way that you want them versus you actually going through the process of making them yourself. Okay. Another thing that's on these plates typically is some type of indicator. And this indicator is very important because it helps me see the components that are there in my sample, especially if they're non-colored. So if we're processing samples and it's a clear sample like water and colorless like water, then I'm not going to be able to see the spots on the plate because I have to rely on my eyes to see them and to be able to measure them from that position. However, the silica or the alumina can be mixed with an indicator, and the indicator will pick up any type of organic compound that might be present onto the plate, and it will make it glow under the presence of UV light. So we'll talk about basically these indicators a little bit later on, but that is a very common stationary phase that we choose because very often we're separating organic compounds, and these indicators need to be present in order for us to see them being present onto our plate itself. So there is an indicator mixed in with the silica and alumina. It does not interfere with the separation. It doesn't interfere with the interaction. The only thing that it does is that it just kind of sees where that organic has been, and it makes it glow either bright blue or bright green for us.